having your relationship with the outside world, getting that in order. Tonight we're going to talk about knowing the inner self. And I always like to start with a quote. I don't always start with the peace chants, but this one is from Lala. Are you familiar with Lala? She was a Kashmiri Shaivite saint in the 14th century and wrote many beautiful poems. To learn the scriptures is easy, to live them hard. To search for the real is no simple matter. Deep in my looking, the last words vanished. Joyous and silent, the waking that met me there. To me, this is what we are trying to do when we look inside. We want to look at ourselves. The formalized way of doing this, and we talked about the yamas last night, and we got those. That's how to straighten out our relationship to the external world. Now, to straighten out our internal relationship with ourselves, we go to the niyamas. So, everyone knows what the yamas are now, right? You all remember them perfectly, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Come on. Anyone, the first one? It's really easy.
Ahimsa. Ahimsa.
Ahimsa, right. And what's the second one? Satya. Good. Third?
Asteya.
Asteya. What is Asteya?
Non-skill.
Good. Fourth and fifth?
Brahmacharya.
Brahmacharya and?
Aparigraha.
Excellent. You passed the test. Okay, the niyamas. Everyone know what they are? Sure you do. I bet you do. Okay. This is what we deal with in self-training. This is really looking at inside ourselves. And they sound very similar. We have socha, which is purity of body and mind. Santosha, contentment. You can write. Is that your name? Santosha? Are you content? Somewhat, huh? Tapa, training the senses, austerities, that kind of thing. Swadhyaya, self-study, reflection on sacred words. And Ishvara Pranidhana. What do you? Surrender to God. So, this is how we straighten out our internal life. And I have another, I keep losing these. This is, I'm going to read you another thing and you tell me which scripture it sounds like it came from. The process of self-discovery is not easy. It may involve suffering, doubt, and dismay. But we must not shrink from the fullness of our being in attempting to reduce the pain. Does this sound like Indian scriptures to you? It's Irish. It's Irish wisdom. So we can see that everyone in all traditions has basically the same ideas. That in order to know ourselves and to know God, we have to do a lot of internal searching as well as writing the world, our relationship to the world. So, another 11th century Chinese saint, also a woman, wrote, "Cut brambles long enough, sprout after sprout." Now, if you garden, you know this. "And the lotus will bloom of its own accord, already waiting in the clearing, the single image of light. The day you see this, that day you will become it." So our interior search has to begin with cutting the brambles one by one. And what are the brambles? We each have our own brambles. They're the things that confuse us to keep us from realizing God. If we go into purity of mind and body, what purity of mind? That's keeping your mind clear, keeping your mind on God, trying to train it to think positive thoughts, not go into negativity and despondency, but trying to teach it, bring it back when it starts to go negative. Yesterday we were talking about talk to your mind when it starts thinking thoughts that when it goes in a direction you don't want it to. Talk to it. Say, mind, I don't want to do this. Somebody was shashing on you, just said, my mind, I would like you to think of mother now. So we each have to develop a way that we can train our minds. And it's not being, oh dear, you can't think that. It has to be gentle. It has to be consistent. You have to be compassionate with yourself. It's not wrong to think anything. It's not wrong. It may lead you in a direction you don't want to go. That's all. There's nothing wrong with anything. Because the Lord already knows everything about you. You are divine, so you're not doing anything the Lord doesn't know already. But what we want to do is take it in a direction so that we can take a hold of any kind of thought that we have and make it our own. As I say, it's not something that just happens. It's like any skill that you have. It's not something that a scientific discovery, oh, that's what it is. You have to understand every single step. It's not like becoming proficient at a sport where suddenly everything, you hit the hole in one like Swamiji did the first time he hit a golf ball. Why did he do that? It wasn't because it was good luck. As he said, he had the concentration of mind to when he looked at that, all he saw was the goal. And everything fell into place. He had that kind of mind control. It was the same as wasn't it Arjuna who had to shoot the arrow into the eye of the fish, looking in a bowl of the reflection of the fish? Now, I mean, really. And it's swimming around like this. But they said to be proficient, you have to see the goal and nothing else. So, first thing in putting the niyamas into practice is establish the goal. And since you are here, I will assume that you have an idea of God realization or becoming one with the infinite. And that's why we seek religion. But we have to crystallize and solidify that goal till we understand it and have it clearly in mind. It can't be vague, like when Swami Shraddhananda said, I'm going to meditate on Om. That was a little vague. And he found that and realized it. And so he crystallized the goal that he had. So we have, as I say, purity. Swami Brahmananda, who was the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, never left India, hardly ever gave a lecture, could transform people's lives by simply sitting with them. There was an incident in, I believe it was Benares in the hospital, in the mission unit, and they were having problems with the young brahmacharis. And they had called Swami Brahmananda and said, you have to establish more rules. These boys are unruly, they're not kind to each other, they're arguing all the time. And he said, yes, let me come. So he went from Calcutta from Bellarmine to Benares. And he said, gather everyone together and we'll sit. So they sat and meditated. He stayed for about, I think, 3 or 4 days. And by the end of that time, he hadn't scolded anyone, he hadn't talked to anyone, he hadn't addressed the problem. There was complete peace in the ashram. He said, what we need is more love, not more rules. We have to love our brahmacharis. We have to see they're not perfect. We're not perfect. We have to be kind with ourselves when we're training our minds. We have to be kind with other people. Everyone has their own little things. But purity of mind addresses that. The purer your mind becomes, the less you see of other people's foibles, or what we in our pre-self-examination days would say their problems, how they're irritating us. So Swami Brahmananda said, think to yourself, this thought is immensely harmful to me. It will be my ruin. Impress this idea again and again on your mind. The mind is extremely susceptible to suggestions and will learn whatever you teach it. We know that. You know that from, they say, pure food and pure food for the body and the mind. Okay? Pure food for the body is fairly obvious. You don't eat McDonald's every day. As someone proved, that can really be harmful to your health. So, how about the food for your mind? What we seem to be doing these days is not so much television anymore, it's our computers. And it's YouTube, and it's whatever. And I know some young people who can spend endless amounts of time just looking at, going through the internet. And they're not discriminating too much about what they're watching. Because there's so much to see. And you look at one thing and that's interesting, that leads to about 10 other things that are kind of interesting. And then you're kind of going, really? Led there? Or you watch television and you see all of these things that have nothing to do with anything. But because it's stimulus coming in through your senses, all of a sudden you're watching it. And it's like junk food for your mind. So this is one of the first things we have to do, is we have to look at what we're feeding our minds. Now we feed our minds. I'll give an example of one of our devotees who has been training his mind for years. He is not a monk. He held a regular job. His job allowed him to have an iPod and earphones going most of the time. So he had his day completely planned out. He did an hour of the Gita every day. He did an hour of Spanish, because he wanted to learn Spanish. He did an hour of philosophers. Meister Eckhart, let's see, who else did he do? He did Meister Eckhart, he did the Dalai Lama, he did modern philosophical religious thinkers. He did an hour of murder mysteries. Because he needed some kind of relaxation where he wasn't thinking deep philosophical thoughts all the time. He had a job to do. And you can't do it effectively if you have removed yourself from the world too much. So he kept this up for as long as I've known him. And he also, pure mind and a pure body. He tried to eat properly, he got enough exercise, he was a surfer, so he would go out, and he said that he could feel closer to God out there on the ocean than he often could even, in other places. Because it was so vast, and he said, I always think of the infinite ocean of bliss when I'm there. We each have a place that this can remind us of. Some of you said, with me it's like the stars at night. The moon is huge. I'm going to run out every time they have some kind of astronomical thing happening at night. Because it reminds me how infinitely small I am and how infinitely large eternity is. But we all have something that can create that feeling in ourselves. One of our nuns was a cytologist before she became a nun. And she said that for her, it was looking at those slides and the infinite mystery of the cells. So you see, we can use anything to remind ourselves of God and infinity. It doesn't have to be in a church, in a religious book. It's where we put our mind, but we can use everything we encounter. So, first thing, purity of mind and body. Stay healthy. Don't put too much emphasis on your body because then it takes over. Have a balance between body and mind. This is the vehicle we have been given to realize God. And you have to take care of it just like you have to change the oil in your car. They don't run so well if you don't. So we have to maintain ourselves. We don't have to spend all of our time polishing chrome. We just don't have to do that. Then, let's see. I keep notes and then I forget. Excuse me while I look at this again. Contentment, Santosha. Lose the thread. Contentment. Now, this is another thing. We should be. How do we practice that? Let's start with gratitude for what we do have and not desire for what we don't have. So if we start each day with gratitude for what we have our health, we have a house, we have food, we have everything we need. So we say, thank you. Then we are content with what the externals give us. We work, we do our jobs, we earn enough money to keep ourselves, especially if householders have to earn money to keep themselves and their houses, their families. That's part of your dharma. Now, for monastics in the order, part of our dharma is taking care of the places that the Lord provides so that all devotees can come to them. Because they're not ours. They're the Lord's and they're the devotees. They belong to the Lord and the devotees. So that's our dharma. We have to pay attention to whether the roof is leaking, whether the septic tanks are malfunctioning. We have to pay attention to all of that. So we're not outside of the world, but we don't own them. So it's really job as caretaker. Now, even if, as a householder, if you can cultivate that idea of I am a caretaker, the idea of contentment becomes much stronger because you don't own anything. It's as soon as we start saying it's mine that we start creating our problems, our mental problems. When it's me and mine, that's the small ego exerting itself. But if we can say, my husband is a gift, I worship, I love him because he is a manifestation of God. He is not mine. I love him. I love my wife because she is a manifestation of God. I do not own her. As long as we cut off ownership, my children are gifts from God. This is my job to help them grow to adulthood. But they are not mine. They're manifestations of God that I take care of. And that's everything that we do. We cultivate contentment that way. Because if you don't own it, you don't have to become possessive of it, worried about it, anxious. These are all manifestations of God, and the Lord will take care. And as soon as we lose that anxiety and possessive quality, we are content. I, of course, went in. Have any of you read the book Precepts for Perfection? It's a wonderful book. It's a compilation of all the things the direct disciples said about different topics. And it was written a long time ago. This is not from one of the direct disciples. I think this is from Mark Twain or someone. If a man is content with what he has, he's a very rich man. Conversely, no matter how much a man possesses, if he's not content, he's very poor. And you have seen this, we've seen this all the time with millionaires and billionaires. More money. They're actually poorer than the man who says, I have everything I need. And eventually, because no amount of external things will fill the hole that you are trying to fill. Nothing will fill that but God. So you can amass as much money as Oprah Winfrey. And if you're not happy with it and you still want more, you're in trouble because you're going to be unhappy. You're going to think something's lacking. And if there's a farmer at the farmer's market, and I said to him one day, I said, Lord, you work hard and have very little result. And he looked at me, he says, I've never worked a day in my life. He said, I love what I do. And he's totally content. Works he works really hard, but he doesn't feel that way. And it's all a matter of our own internal attitude, how we look at everything. Oftentimes, I know, sometimes when I was working, I had certain jobs. I had temporary jobs, and I would look at them as drudgery and when can I get out of this? That just hurt myself. I just made myself unhappy. As soon as I just went, I'm doing this, and I could do it well, and didn't think about it, and was happy doing it, I was perfectly okay. And as long as I liked what I was doing, or made a point to like it, then you're okay. They have a key, there's a keychain that in a store down in Santa Barbara, and one side says, do what you love, and the other side is love what you do. Now I thought, oh, okay, and I was laughing about it. But then I carry that all the time as a reminder. We have to, that's part of our mind training, part of practicing contentment. The other thing, and this was, you're going to get some quotes tonight. Do you know who taught me to get quotes? Swami Swaminanda. He said, just read quotes. Anyway, this was Swami Shivananda. Contentment doesn't, this is not him, but contentment sounds a little boring in today's society. Because we're always like, people are always saying, extreme sports, do this, do that, cause, excitement. But contentment is actually a much better place to be. It is. It doesn't create heart problems, heart flutters, and all that. It's actually quite nice. Swami Shivananda said, the one thing, don't yield to despondency. When you're, if you're not content, don't yield to despondency, because that makes the mind restless. Always think that you're all blessed and you're the children of the Lord. If evil thoughts come to your mind, don't pay any heed. They're impressions of the past lives of the mind. And now and then they come. Have strength. There is no fear. You will get everything. And then Lala said, that one is blessed and at peace, who doesn't hope, to whom desire makes no more loans, nothing coming, nothing owned. Now, desire makes no more loans. I thought about that for a while, and most of us, as soon as the desire arises, we kind of feel like restless. We need something. Something's happening. But if we think about desire makes no more loans, it's an interesting way of putting it. The third niyama is sense training. Training the senses not to go outward. And how do you do that? Your eyes are going to see, your ears are going to hear, your nose is going to smell, you're going to feel things. How do you train your senses? Well, part of it is, once again, looking at what you're feeding them. Not to look at, give them a direction. Don't overindulge. Even if you look for beauty all the time, you can become extremely restless, running after everything that's beautiful. And you really can't see anything then. So, if you like good food and you want the new taste, the latest taste all the time, eventually you don't taste anything, and your desires are never satisfied. Sense desires are endless. So if you just put a lid on them and look at them and say, do I really need that? Can I really appreciate it? Do I have to go to every single art show that is advertised? Or can I be selective? We have to be selective in what we indulge in with our senses. As I say, it's endless. Absolutely endless where they will lead us. Because that's the nature of them, that's the nature of Maya. They're made to draw us out, to keep us involved in Maya. And once we've established a goal that that's not where we want to be, that's when you have to start controlling them. Until you've made that as a goal that you don't want to be, a captive of Maya anymore, then indulge your senses. You know, there's nothing wrong with them. It's all part of God's plan too. The only time it makes you truly unhappy is if you have another goal in mind. And you will eventually, because there is no satisfying them. No matter how many lives you live, there is no satisfying the senses. They will always create desires. And more, until you're exhausted and you say, I give up. All I want is God. Which may be where some of us are, you know, because we have gotten to this point. We may have exhausted ourselves in the past 100,000 lives. But what we're dealing with is right now. And what our goal is this life. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So that's the whole reason why we would even bother with self-training and self-examination. I mean, I know a lot of people who are perfectly happy, and I mean perfectly happy, with their lives as they are. They have no desire to find anything more. They think this is good. This is what it is. And I have my family, I have my home, I have a good job. And yes, they're content in a way. In a way. They have no desire for anything more than this. This life is enough until it gets near death. And then they look at their lives often and say, is there anything more? And what we seem to be doing our entire lives, you may or may not like this, we're preparing ourselves for our death, because we know from the moment we're born that that's where we're going. And if we want to go beyond that, then you must train your mind, train yourself to be prepared for when death comes. It's not anything, you know, scary or bad. It's just the next step. And when you see people who have prepared themselves, it's really quite uplifting. We happened to be in the room when Swami Prabhupada died, and his whole life was directed towards God. So his death was very powerful and it lifted us all up to another plane, because he waited till the 4th of July. We were all in his room chanting, and all of a sudden he took one breath and he was gone. And everyone kind of, but the feeling in the room when they have prepared for this is your whole being is uplifted. Same with Swami Swahananda. You all know he had a stroke and they put him in intensive care on life support, which he said never do. But even out of a coma, I mean, he'd been in a coma for 3 days. And they removed the life support, and his lifelong habit of God and meditation, he took one gigantic breath and left. And you could see him pulling everything up to leave. So this is basically what we're doing. We're preparing for a good exit, to go where we want to go, not to be just dragged along by karmas. Otherwise, why would we even bother with the yamas and niyamas? So, sense training. That's a very, very important part. Because as long as we let our senses drag us out, we will be dragged from birth to birth. And that's not, like a death sentence. It's just what's normal. Swami Brahmananda also said, we get into self-effort. He said, be self-reliant. Don't depend on anyone else. Self-effort is absolutely necessary for spiritual life. When it comes right down to it, you're going to do it yourself. Your guru gives you a hint, gives you a mantra, gives you the way to do it, but he can't do it for you. You have to do it yourself. You've got to put forth the effort. You've got to do what he told you to do. And then he knows that will lead you to the goal. And he knows that without a doubt. The second part after the sense training is self-study. Not fun. Not fun. You would know that. People trying to study themselves, right? And how do they do it? Most people don't want to look at their real motivations. We behave in a certain way. We always behave in that way. I mean, it's a lifelong habit we have. I told you earlier that we have quite a few people that come to the temple who are in AA. And another quote that they always had us do for them, we had a calligrapher in the convent for a while, and she would calligraph these things, and they were beautiful, so people could frame them. And one of them was doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is crazy. So we have to change. We cannot continue with our old habits and expect to grow. Growth is change. But you want to change in a direction that you want to go. So that requires you looking at what you're doing, looking at how you're thinking, and saying, what changes do I have to make to go in the direction that I want to? Earlier today we were talking about our relationships with our families, and another friend of mine said, the people who can push your buttons the best are your parents, because they installed them. And I told the ladies, I said, yes, at 62, my parents were still alive, and I was driving my father around, and he was still telling me how to drive. Told me where to turn, when to turn on the blinker, when to, turn left, turn right. Nope, stop. Didn't you see that car? And I'm going, I'm 62 years old. I've been driving for 50 years I've been driving. And you're still telling me? And finally I just gave up. I stopped arguing, thought, well, okay. And then pretty soon, he stopped telling me. We just go along and he'd tell me, and then pretty soon he was going, well, I guess you know how to do this. So changing my immediate reaction, damn, I know how to drive, with gritted teeth, it's the only person you can change is yourself. The only person miserable with his directions was me. He didn't even know he was doing it, so, But that's the kind of thing, studying ourselves to see, what am I reacting to? It's my ego saying, I already know this, why is he telling me? And that's my ego. Swami Sarvadevananda is one of the worst backseat drivers you'll ever hope to drive if you ever drive him. Okay? really awful. And he only learned how to drive when he got to the United States, so he hasn't been driving that long. I was taking him to Disneyland one day with one of the visiting swamis, and he was telling me, go into that lane. No, go into that lane. Go past that car. And I'm, okay, this is like my dad. And finally he said, how long have you been driving? And I went, since I was 15. Oh. Still with the kind of, since I was 15 I've been driving. And I have not, in all that time I think I have only had one accident when someone ran into the back of the car. So, you know, but it's just our egos reacting to people. And the only person that is unhappy is ourselves. So we have to look at what we're doing, what's making us unhappy, what we're having problems with, and really analyze why it's happening. Why am I reacting? Why do I feel that way? And it's uncomfortable. It's very, very uncomfortable. It's also can be very depressing if you allow it to be. But it doesn't have to be, because anything, any habit can be changed. We established the habit by repetition. And like Brahmananda said, you can change the habit by repetition. So you decide how you would like to behave and repeatedly, consciously do that. And eventually that will become the habit. And you will be a bit of a different person. And eventually you might be a lot of a different person. And the person that you were when you said, I'd rather be over here, suddenly they're getting very close. And you are the person that you always knew you were. I won't say that you wanted to be. It's the person you always knew you were. Because I think all of us, when we react in a way that disappoints us, it disappoints us because we know we're not really that person. Say if we get angry at someone, when we get angry at someone for some reason and snap. I had a fairly bad temper for a lot of my life. And it was that fast. And things would come out of my mouth and I go, why did I say that? I don't mean that. It's just reaction. And Swami Swahananda helped me with it. Just tick it down every time. So you watch your mind, you see how you're reacting, and it quits. Because it truly gets tired of being watched. So we can change any habit we have. Any habit. If we want to badly enough. And then the last of the niyamas was surrender to God. You think you do it. We think we do it all the time. And we think, yes, I'm going to leave it all in Mother's lap. I'm going to hand it all over to God. And then we kind of second guess, well, they're not working quite fast enough. It's not quite going the way I thought this would happen. And so we start second guessing, and we kind of take back the surrender. I think maybe I can do it. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done that. But to truly surrender means you continue doing the work. You do your part and leave the results to the Lord. Because it really will be taken care of in the way that will work out best for you. Sometimes that's very difficult to see. But with self-surrender and faith in the Lord, it is true. I was telling the lady, you all know Swami Ganeshananda. And then there was Swami, what was his name, in Moscow? When he went to Moscow, they took him up, and you know, religion, he's not supposed to be teaching religion in Moscow. He is supposed to be teaching philosophy and sociology or something like that. It's not a church. So they took him, people picked him up at the airport, took him up to this apartment, and put him in it and told him not to go outside. He had no food in the apartment, he had nothing. And he was told not to go outside. Later that day, someone came and put a chicken in the kitchen for him. That was his food. And he had complete surrender to the Lord. Thakur sent him there, so Thakur was going to take care of him. He said for about a week he had a chicken and cake to eat. And that was it. And then everything started to come. People started, the devotees came and they took care of him. And he said, I just had to really know that the Lord was going to take care of me. Swami Ganeshananda had a similar experience when he arrived in Germany. It was winter, he had no food in the house, and no car to get out. And he said he was wondering what was going to happen. I think he had some rice, that was about it. And he said he was truly wondering, what have you done, Thakur? What have you done? And there was a knock on the door, and a neighbor came up and said, I saw a light in your house and thought you probably don't have a car and can't get out. And he had a great big box of food for Swami Ganeshananda. And he said, then I knew that no matter what, Thakur was watching over me. But so often we think we have that reliance. But when it comes right down to it, we kind of get, well, maybe I should go out and do. Now, he was doing what he had to do at the center, but he did have that total self-reliance, that reliance that he would be taken care of. It's a difficult place to be. Have any of you read, I think someone said you had a discussion of it, The Practice of the Presence of God? Brother Lawrence? One of my absolutely all-time favorite books. It gave rise to all of the books about what would Jesus do, what would Buddha do. Written by, I believe he was an 11th century monk, it might have been 13th century. And he was a lay brother who had been a soldier and crippled. And he was working in the kitchen and stores of the monastery because he didn't have the education to be a choir brother. So, but his whole life was practicing Jesus walking with him at every single minute with every single thing he did. And he wrote it down. Were they letters to a friend? I don't remember. They were letters to someone. And he wrote these down on how he went through life. Now this is something any of us can do. Constant remembrance. We just have to train our minds to do it. It doesn't matter what job you have. If you honestly feel that the Lord is your constant companion and always right beside you, that's surrender. And how do we even attempt that? Well, listen to stories if you can't read. Read the words of the your chosen ideal, if they're available. Study the life, know all the details, make them a part of your being. There's another book similar to that, and it's called The Way of the Pilgrim. It's a Russian starets who traveled around, and his whole thing was constant repetition of the Jesus prayer. He was a wandering ascetic, and he did this. There's many different ways to do it. The itinerant singers of India, the Bals, they constantly travel with the friend. And who is the friend but the Lord? Constantly sing, you know. I mean, every tradition has a method of establishing this. And so we have to find our own particular one that we can do. Some people that I've known have Holy Mothers. They're always there with them. And the monks in Bellarmont used to say they prayed to Thakur, but now they say, oh, Mother's much easier. Mother answers things more quickly. So, you know, but it's that kind of thing. That's part of our mind training, our sense training. It's making the niyamas alive in our being. And I'm sure all of you know have different things you have done in your lives to make God more alive in your life. Not just something we read about and come here occasionally and talk about. How to keep that presence with you all the time. How to remember it when you're driving through traffic and stuck in the Los Angeles freeway, getting more and more irritated. How do we keep that presence in mind rather than going into road rage? How do we keep it in mind when people are behaving in a totally obnoxious way? And do we keep it in mind, or do we react and get angry? I mean, I don't know. I know that the practice of being content with what you have in the material world and completely discontent with your internal growth is good. There's always more you can do. There's always more you can have in spiritual life. There is no end to it, because it is seeking the infinite. It's like the stories that Ramakrishna told about the man who was told to go to the forest, and he found a sandalwood grove, and he thought, this is it. And then he went further, and pretty soon he was at the diamond mine. You can always go further in spiritual life. Don't ever be satisfied with what is going on. That can be a great pitfall, to be satisfied with what you're doing, because you can go into a place of complacency and think, I don't need to do any more. As Swami Prabhupada used to say, sometimes we have little hints of what's available. Don't ever be satisfied with the hint.